Sometimes the best stories are the ones that refuse to behave. Today's guest survived three stepmothers, and I'm told not at the same time. She lived on a boat and traced her family tree so far back it might just be fiction. Along the way, she's written poetry, short stories, and a novel that's as unruly and unforgettable as she is. My guest today claims the one thing more obstreperous than a night shift in the ER is her own imagination. Jo Taylor is a retired ER nurse, a genealogist with a healthy skepticism, and author of postcards, collected poems, and short stories, as well as her debut novel, Margaret of Thibodeau. Married for 33 years to a real-life hero, Jo brings the same grit, wit, and irreverence to her writing that she brought to nursing. And she's here to remind us that sometimes the messiest stories are the ones that save us. I'm Scott Allen, and you're listening to the Enlightened Life podcast, where we explore the soul's journey, the mysteries of healing, and the moments that transform us. Let's get started. Jo, I have been looking forward to this. You've lived a life that could fill a dozen novels, and somehow you've managed to fit it all into poetry, short stories, and now a debut novel. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So glad you're here. You call yourself obstreperous, not a word most people use on their resumes. So where does that come from, and how has that shaped your life and your writing?
So my dad used a different word, but it's not as kind, not as socially acceptable.
There you go.
Pardon me. And when I was an ER nurse, the ER docs called me that. They said, "You're being obstreperous." And so they could say that to me with patients around without most of them realizing that that meant I was being a pain in the ass,
That is
which is what obstreperous means.
yeah.
So I kind of owned it and gained it. Yeah.
So with all you've got, three stepmothers, a boat, and a 33-year marriage, your book really does read a little bit like a novel. How do you decide what makes it into your stories and what stays in the family vault?
Well, that's a great question. I started with this novel. I have 4 others in the works, but I started with this particular novel because I'm also a psychic medium. But I didn't discover I had psychic experiences my entire life, but I didn't realize I could talk back to them until about 2016. And when I discovered that I could have some control, I could learn what this was, because in the 70s and 80s, no one wanted to hear about this. I didn't tell many people that I had these experiences. And so I kind of took what happened to me in my childhood, that I don't want to hear it, but still having weird things happen to me. And I kind of thought, well, what if I reinvent my story? I decided that I would just kind of retell my childhood in a way that someone would be there to explain to me what it was that was happening. And so the one of the characters is actually a mentor that you can find in the Akashic records. So I used her teaching Margaret the things as something I would have loved to have heard. My childhood would not have been so fraught with disaster if I kind of knew, hey, this is normal. This happens to people. We just don't talk about it as a culture. So that was the first thing. And I'm kind of trying to normalize intuition and psychic experiences because, there are people out there who either live in families that it's not discussed, or the culture they're in, or there's really nowhere for them to learn. I kind of did it as an instructive. This is a real thing. There are people out there who can talk to you about it. So I'm trying to normalize this type of experience.
I think that's great. I mean, it's funny because I have a very similar story. I wasn't a nurse. I was a funeral director for 35 years. And I, the joke is, thousands of dead people, not one of them talked to me. But, I knew there was something was up. Something was weird. Like that's how I used to describe it. Well, that's just a weird coincidence. How does this happen? And it wasn't till I was an adult and I was out of that field that it really started to present itself. So it's just interesting. I love to hear everybody's stories. Your first book, Postcards, that's a collection of poems and short stories. What drew you to that form? And how did you speak truths, that a novel sometimes can't?
So the writing really started for me in 2008. 8 or 9. As a nurse, I wanted to get away from the bedside and go into administration, but you had to have a bachelor's degree, any bachelor's degree to do that. And I had, before I went into nursing, I had been studying biochemistry. And there was no way I was going to be able to go back and finish that. So I got an English degree. And in the process, discovered I loved writing. So I got some great advice. Start with short form. Before you tackle a novel is this giant undertaking. There's form and structure, and you have to have some kind of plot line and develop character. And so if you start with the shorter forms, you develop skill. And I had started with the short stories, and someone said, "You're very verbose. You talk a lot," as everyone will see on the podcast. And they said, you've really got to be able to be concise sometimes. So learn formed poetry, like the formal stuff, the Shakespearean sonnets and all that. So I learned formed poetry. And then once you know the rules, you can break the rules and go into free verse. And I just loved it. It's very fun and freeing,
Yes.
and it's different for me to have to make everything be concise. And so I had gathered, I think I had written 350 poems and about 50 60 short stories. So not all of those are in the collection, only the best ones are in the collection. But I decided that to discover what publishing was like, I was going to put out that collection and run it through the whole cycle of editing and production and publication. And I learned a lot that helped me with my debut novel.
Wow. So, which was Margaret of Thibodeau. That is your
Yes.
debut
Yes,
novel.
that came out in March.
I was just going to say you released it this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's the story behind that story?
So that's the one where I'm kind of retelling my
That's the one
childhood.
that
Margaret it's 1974.
Mm-hmm.
And Margaret is 14 years old. Her mother passed when she was 8. Mine passed when I was 2. And so I used kind of some of the similar things, but enough different where it's not really my story. But her dad decides he's going to get remarried, as dads do. And Margaret wants none of this. And the main reason she wants none of it is because her mom comes in and visits her at night, sits on the bed, sings her songs. She still feels connected to her mom. And she's afraid if this new woman comes in, her mom's not going to come around anymore. But she doesn't tell anyone this. And so it's all her shenanigans over a summer of trying to get this to stop. And so it's just the story, a coming of age, basically, of someone who has psychic skills. And so I liked being able
Nice.
to combine those two ideas.
Yeah. How long did that take you? Because that is a huge undertaking.
Oh my gosh. Novels are weird for me in that I'll start them and write them, and then I put them away for like a year and let them soak. And then kind of like soup.
Yeah.
And then I'll get it out and I'll
Except
fuss
you don't
with
want to
it
leave
some
soup
more.
for a year. Probably not.
No, not a year. That would not be good. So Margaret, I probably started Margaret in 2015. And so it took 10 years to ultimately, hopefully all the rest of them, now that I know what I'm doing, won't take quite so long.
Yeah.
The one I'm working on now that should come out this next March, I started working on the next year. So it's also been about 10 years, but the other ones will be quicker, I hope.
And I'll say too, you mentioned you have 4 others in the works. I don't know how you do that. I published my first book. It came out in January, and it really is the story, my story, kind of like this is your story, except it's not a novel. It is the story, kind of going through my childhood into the funeral business and then into the awakening. But that took me 4 years. And not only did I not know what I was doing, it started out as notes. And then it started out as, well, maybe I can make this into something. And then I realized by the time I got to the end that my writing style had changed.
Yeah.
So I had to go back to the beginning.
Mhm.
And I thought, I don't like that now. And I had to rewrite that. So it was really interesting. That's why it just took forever. So people are saying, what's the next one? And I think, I don't know. I put so much on hold to do that, to finish it up, that I'm trying to work through that now. And I've got this podcast and I've got my regular business and everything. And I just feel like I don't know where the time comes from. I don't know when to sit and write.
Exactly. So most writers who actually put out book after, a lot of people have a book in them. They have a story to tell. Fabulous. It's a whole lot of work to do that, but the
Mhm.
stories are usually worth telling. But they don't necessarily want to be a writer and do it again. So I am a writer and I love fiction. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do. And so one of the things that makes it easy to work on a bunch at the same time is they're all over the place. Like Margaret is it's literary fiction. It's a little bit more young adult, although it's not particularly young adult. The next one's going to be a historical fiction. The one after that is a psychic thriller, and the one after that is I haven't categorized that one. I'm not far enough into it yet to
Yeah.
decide which one. And then there's another one after that. So it's kind of for me, I can kind of categorize them, but some writers who write in the same genre, they can just keep going with the different stories. And sometimes it's questions people ask you about your book that make you go, huh, hadn't thought of that. Okay, I'm going to have to write that now. So
Yeah.
it's lovely to talk to people about the book, not just to sell it, but to get their take on, okay, well, what happened after this? And that's where sequels come from, I think,
Well, I
a
was
lot of
just
times.
gonna say, are any of these a series like Margaret? Will she
Not
come back?
intentionally. Margaret could be. Mimi and Maurice will not be. That's the historical fiction because that one is based on true story. I have letters from a man and a woman who wrote for since from 1922 to 1957 over World War II, and the story is completely told in that one book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not the biggest fan of writing series. I think that my brain doesn't connect the dots for that long. And my novels do tend to be on the shorter end. This Margaret was like 65,000 words. And then the other one's going to be 100,000 words. And that might not mean a lot to people who are reading. But some of the fantasy books that come out like this, they're like 175,000 words. War and Peace was 550,000
Sure,
words.
sure.
So
Yeah,
the bigger the book, the harder it is to structure. So I
of
tend to be a little bit shorter.
course it is. Yeah. Does your experience in the ER find its way into your novels at all? And not so much the experience, the actual nursing, but some of the vulnerable moments that you've experienced.
Yes. A lot of my short stories actually are about nursing, and quite a few of the poems are too. In Margaret, there was a couple medical type things, and I was very, very confident when my editor wanted to change something to make it smoother. And I said, yeah, that wouldn't happen. So that's one thing that I have an advantage over other people because almost all the time, if you're going to tell a story, there's some kind of health problem or there's some kind of thing that happens. And to have and I also worked ambulance for 6 years. So to have that knowledge of how things go, mostly I can write it very easily without stressing about it. And then when my editor's like, we should change this, I can either say okay or no, and know that I really have a problem when things are not medically correct.
Right, 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 right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'd like to shift just a second because you mentioned that you had traced your family back to like the year 310, maybe, probably, or whatever. I don't know, but it's like a rabbit hole with no bottom. What have you learned about yourself in that process?
You ask such good questions. So, being a medium and having been able to go into past lives, we're not usually our relatives.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, so I can go way back there. We actually have a Roman, if all of this that we've found is correct. And my son has kind of taken over the genealogy search now. But a lot of times when people who are not necessarily in the psychic community, they talk about, "Oh, well, I think she's my grandmother reincarnated or she's my aunt." I personally think that that's a little bit more genetic, that you get quirks and like my son would rub his head when he went to sleep when he was little, and I do that. And so he didn't do it from watching me. There's weird genetic
Yeah,
things that people do that
sure.
are quirks. So I think that's one thing I learned is that it's really not it is the sum of everything. Do you realize all those people had to be alive and procreate for me to be here? That is just astounding when you think about it. I kind of wish some people who think that they're not valuable sometimes in this world, it's like, look at all the people that came before you. You're precious. You're the only one that came from that thing. Or, okay, maybe your two siblings too. So it's a different way to look at your value as an incarnated human.
Well, not just that, but look at it the other way too. How many people, if you can look back, how many people will come after you because you exist? And what
Exactly.
types of changes in the world will take
Right.
place because you exist? We
And
don't
I
even
think
know.
we do incarnate sometimes that way. Is it's not necessarily that each of us is supposed to have a stellar or amazing life or do something. Everybody's like, what's my purpose? Your purpose is to be here and have those children and have these relationships and influence your friends and influence anybody else you can. And all the generations after will still remember you, whether it's actually remembering you or it's like, I don't know, my fourth great grandfather, but there's influence in me from him that I don't even realize. And so I think that's one thing that genealogy kind of helps with is you can go back and look, oh, wow, they had interesting lives. And boy, am I lucky to live in 2025 because life has not been easy up until now. And we think we have it hard, but it's actually a lot easier than it used to be.
Yeah, and think, I mean, to the year 300, that's it. I wouldn't want to go back that far. I don't even know how you go back that far in terms of genealogy.
So I had a
Amazing.
little bit of luck in that one, my dad was super interested in it. So he worked for years. But my grandmother's first cousin was Martha Graham, who was a famous dancer. And so Martha was interested in genealogy and she could hire someone to go to Europe and do all the research. And she did that. And so she got a lot. So that was in the, 50s and 60s. She got a lot of that done for her. And then my dad published a book in 87, I think, that is our genealogy. So I have it for sure written down. And then we've slowly tried to put it into
Wow.
Ancestry because he did it all on Word.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, so you had that little edge. You didn't go there
Yes.
and have to go back.
Oh, no, no. Probably it's going to be very easy now with AI helping because it'll make connections on all the different platforms, the GED files,
Yeah.
and be able to show you what about this, what about that, what about this. So,
Interesting. I hadn't even
yeah,
considered the whole AI aspect to it.
it's going to help a lot.
Yeah.
And for the book that I'm writing, Mimi and Maurice, they were nobodies. I hate to say nobodies because they were amazing and fantastic people, but they weren't famous. She lived in San Francisco most of her life, and there was no articles written about her. She just worked as a secretary. I found 2 pictures of her on the internet. I found through Ancestry, I found her whole family tree, all her addresses.
You're kidding.
It's astounding what you can find on the internet. And that was a couple years ago that I did that research. So,
Were they family of yours? I mean,
no,
no, nothing.
the story came to me because a friend of mine, her grandmother was a hospice nurse for Mimi. And Mimi died without any heirs. And so the grandmother found this box of hundreds of letters and like read 1 or 2 of them. And she's like, I can't, these are valuable. So she gave them to my friend to maybe write. And my friend's a physician and she looks at me and she goes, there's no way I'm ever going to have time to write this. Would you consider writing the story? So it basically fell in my lap. So then I transcribed 200 some letters and
And they will become, I mean, I hate to use, I know what you mean. You hate to say the word nobody, but we're differentiating between people who have household names and people who don't, right?
correct.
Some of
Yes,
us are very, they were somebody and they were very valuable in their own right, but not just in terms of a notoriety.
correct.
But they will gain their notoriety posthumously through your writing, and their writing, because
Yes.
it's their writing. So it's
Well,
wonderful.
and Maurice is partly an amazing I'm gonna have to put this in the afterword of the book because he's the reason I discovered I was a medium. So I'm typing away, writing his story because I have to kind of fill in. There's what's written in the letters, but in order to novelize it, you have to tell the rest of their lives. And we have all his letters to her, but all of her letters to him were burned by the SS in Germany during World War II. So all of her
Yes.
letters are gone. So I kind of have to make up her life. And I'm typing away and I hear Maurice say that's not how that happened. And I'm like, okay, I've had psychic experiences before, but that was a little bit much. And he kind of starts talking to me and I smell his cigar smoke and he kind of kibitzes me about, okay, this happened this way and this happened that way. And he gave me a couple pieces of history that I then looked up and that was correct. That's what happened. So I'm like, okay, but I don't believe you. You have to prove to me that this is
Yeah.
true. And he says, okay, I'll send you a picture. Okay, you died in 1989. How are you going to send me a picture? Well, on Facebook, I had subscribed to a page called Everyday Africa. And Everyday Africa just posted pictures of all over Africa. And I had been there in 2000, loved it. And the next day, and I cannot prove it was the next day, but it was very soon after that, I'll send you a picture. They posted a picture of a Congo warrior, and he wrote constantly in his letters about how he loved to take pictures. And he especially loved to take Portraits of the Warrior in Congo. And I look at this picture and it has his name at the bottom as credit, and it resides in the Belgian Museum. He took that photo in 1954 and he sent it to me. I'm like, okay. So that started the whole rabbit hole of learning to be a medium. And I kind of discovered that I needed to do readings in order to write the story the way it should be done.
Well, and I'm telling you right now, I know this is kind of, well, you won't think it's weird because obviously you're a medium. So the whole, everything we do is weird. But I do feel like I'm having this incredible deja vu moment right now,
Really?
this story, and I don't know why. It's not like this has happened to me. It's not, but it's as if I know the story. And that is a very funny thing. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking to you. But it does happen sometimes that you
Hmm.
get that feeling like I've heard this, I know this, but I don't know why I know it because I really don't know it. Very funny, very funny. And I interviewed a woman on the show. Her episode hasn't come out yet, but she writes books, but they're all channeled. And I thought, well, so how do you do that? Like, I mean, I don't know. You sit down and I don't know. But I feel like when you're supposed to do something, they show up.
Yes. He 100%, he said, I have gone through all these machinations to get it to you for you to write. And I'm like, Maurice, why do you want this story told? And he said, it's about devotion. And he goes, people aren't really devoted to anything anymore, and it will hit a chord. He doesn't want it for him. He's already in the other side, but he said it will speak to people. And so I feel very responsible to do it justice. Um, he's actually even more fascinating than she is. Sorry, Mimi. He worked with the United States Army. He was in the Belgian resistance, so he was underground during all of World War II, but he spoke 6 languages. And so he was a fabulous interpreter for them. He received the Medal of Freedom from the United States government for
I don't
his
know.
actions. He's a war hero. So he's this fascinating character. She's amazing in her own right. And so it's as much fun just writing the story and being with them a lot as it will be to put it out into the world.
That's incredible. That's incredible. All right, I'm gonna say something else to you. Do you know anybody else that's ever won, not won, but earned the medical Medal of Freedom?
I don't. I don't
I
know
do.
personally. I
I do.
know who.
And this is what's so bizarre about this conversation. I worked for a gentleman, my first job in the funeral business, and he was in World War II. So we're going back to the early 80s, right? So he was in his 60s at the time. And he was a commando that stormed the beach of Normandy. But I think what he won it for is he was told to go onto the beach. This is before they actually stormed the beach. So he went onto the beach and his job was to bring back samples of sand. And he said, "What am I doing that for? You don't need to know what you're doing it for. Just go bring it in." And he had to sneak onto the beach, like a spy, I guess, bring the sand back. And because I think they wanted to know what the texture was so that the vehicles could get onto the beach,
Right?
he stormed the beach and watched people around him get ripped apart. And in fact, that's in my book. So I feel like that is a real he was a real part of my story because he's the one that got me into the funeral business, but he won that Medal of
Interesting.
Freedom and he got it for his actions in World War II. So I think this conversation is really bizarre. It's not
That's
bizarre in a
interesting.
bad way, but it's
No,
giving me goosebumps. You know what I mean? It's like
connections.
yeah, it's like connections, and I just love this, and he was a hero, and he was a great man. He's also, passed now as well, but it's just wonderful. Speaking of heroes, your husband, a lot of your hero characters are based on him. So why is he a hero? What makes him a hero besides the fact that he's your husband?
He's my husband. He's my hair.
Yeah.
He will probably be annoyed that I'm
Oh, no.
talking about him, but that's too bad. He was firefighter for his whole career and ended up as chief in Montecito fire. And he was pretty instrumental his whole career as a leader. People loved him as a leader, and he risked his life many times. I told him, please don't tell me like 2 weeks from it happened. But he told me stories when he would risk his life to save others. And he said that it was so interesting when that decision came. You never know what you're going to do. You think you're going to, okay, I'm going to go get that person, but you know that that risks your life. And he said, I was always happy that I made the decision. It was that small little calculation. Like sometimes there's no chance and you're just doing something, sorry, people, dumb,
Mm-hmm.
because you're just giving your life for no benefit. But there's always those times where, yeah, there's benefit and there's risk. And he said, I was happy that I always made that decision quickly and smart, and he's still around.
God, thank God.
So that's why I call him my hero.
Yeah. That man I just told you about, his name was Walter. And Walter, who got the Medal of Freedom, stormed the beach in Normandy, was also a volunteer firefighter. And he did that for years and years and years. And then when he stopped doing that, he was civil defense director for the town that he lived in, on top of being a funeral director all those years. So I don't know.
Wow.
It's
Boy,
just
we have
great.
some interesting
It's interesting.
combinations of
Yeah,
stories.
it's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Love it.
You lived on a boat,
I
which I
did.
never did, but and it sounds romantic until you remember the reality of cramped quarters and unpredictable weather and all of that other stuff. What did life on the water teach you about resilience and letting
Well, yes. It's probably that's the biggest thing is about being resilient. Just go with the flow. And, as a young nurse, she kind of had to be that way anyway. But our son had just gone off to college, and my husband had changed jobs to move to Montecito. And we rented a couple houses around Santa Barbara for a while, but very expensive to live there. And he loved boats and he wanted to, be on a boat. And I said, well, let's just get a boat and live on it in the harbor. And everything kind of fell into place, and we did that. We lived there for 5 years. It's about 250 square foot of living space. So we had nothing, and we had our dog too. Our
Yep.
dog Abby, who's since passed, but she loved it on the boat. And it was you had to develop a different routine, and you couldn't be mad and storm off into another room. You could storm off for 10 feet. That was about it. So, and I discovered I guess there's some relationships that need more space, but we're actually very good at being together. And then we're very good at being apart, because when he was a firefighter, he would be gone for weeks on a fire. And so in the days before cell phones, even he would be gone for weeks. And so I could tolerate that. And then when he's around and on the boat, and it was really fun to do readings on the boat, because being that close to water, the connection was very, very good. So I love doing readings on the boat. And then it just kind of lull you to sleep at night. So it was great.
Were you docked most of the time?
Oh, yeah, most of the time. But Santa Barbara's right across from the islands, the Santa Barbara Channel, the Channel Islands. And so we would go across and stay at the island sometimes. But yeah, most of the time we just lived in the harbor.
That's beautiful. So if you could send a postcard back to your younger self, what would it say?
That everything that is happening is going to make you who you become, and you'll like who you become, and so it's okay. That good things, bad things, everything. It makes you who you are.
100% agree with that. That's beautiful. We are almost at the end. And before we wrap up, is there anything, whether it's a story, a poem, word of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners, something that only you could share?
I think that if people could realize, whether you're on the spiritual path or just living your life, that we are all connected. That sounds like, woo, oh, we're all connected. But we really are. We come into incarnation here in bodies to discover division. So that's why there's racism. That's why there's countries. That's why, because when you're in spirit and have no body, there's no separation. You cannot have separation at all. It doesn't exist. And so what we are doing down here, good, bad, or indifferent, is we're learning, discovering, experiencing what separation is like. Because that isn't reality. Reality is that we are all one.
Joe, thank you so much for bringing your spirit, your humor, and your heart into the show today. And for everyone listening, you can find Joe's books, postcards, collected poems, and short stories, and Margaret of Thibodeau, wherever books are sold. And please make sure you visit her website at jotaylorauthor.com. And her name again, Jotaylor author. And if this conversation made you laugh, think, or maybe even want to trace your own family tree, please share the episode. Leave a review and join us at mediumscottallen.com for more stories, events, and inspiration. I'm Scott Allen. Thank you for joining us on the Enlightened Life podcast. And remember, sometimes the the best stories are the ones that refuse to behave. We'll see you next time.